I found the photo for days after the funeral. Not because I went looking for it, because his phone was still sitting on my kitchen counter, plugged into the wall, and it lit up on its own at 2 in the morning. In an empty apartment, with nobody there to see it except me, for a few minutes that night. I believed something I'm not proud of believing. I want to tell you the whole thing in order. Exactly the way it happened, because the order is the only reason any of it ends up making sense. My name doesn't really matter for this story. What matters is that I spent 2 years working alongside a combat medic named Yuri. First in training, back when everything still felt theoretical, and later out in the field, attached to a unit that handled forward casualty evacuation in the early years of the full-scale war. Yuri wasn't the reckless type. If anything, he was the opposite. He was the guy who'd recheck a tourniquet someone else had already tied. Not because he doubted them, but because it had become pure muscle memory by then. He didn't smoke. He didn't drink before shifts. Not even the kind of one drink to take the edge off that everyone else quietly allowed themselves. He was meticulous in a way that used to annoy people until the moment it saved someone's life, and then nobody complained about it again. He didn't believe in anything he couldn't measure or hold in his hands. That's important, because it's going to matter later. But he did have one habit that used to drive the rest of us a little crazy, in a fun kind of way. He carried his phone everywhere, not for calls. Cell service out there was unreliable at the best of times, and completely dead in a lot of the areas we worked. He carried it for photos, hundreds of them, guys eating cold rations out of tins, laughing at something that wasn't even funny. A stray dog that had attached itself to the unit for a few weeks. He used to say, half joking, that if he didn't come home, he wanted his sister to have proof of what the men in his unit actually looked like when they were laughing. Not just the version she'd eventually see folded into a flag and a formal letter from the ministry. None of us thought too hard about that comment at the time. You say things like that out there. Everyone does. It becomes a kind of gallows humor background noise you stop registering. He died on a Tuesday. I wasn't there when it happened. I was 2 sectors away, dealing with an evacuation of my own. I got the phone call first, the kind where you know from the tone of the first 3 words before anyone says anything specific. Then came the confirmation, a day later, the official kind. Then, eventually, a sealed bag of his personal effects, including his phone, which nobody could unlock because none of us knew the passcode and none of us wanted to guess wrong enough times to lock it permanently. It just sat there afterward, dead weight, literally and otherwise, until his sister, a soft-spoken woman named Kiro, who I'd met exactly twice before that, asked if I could hold onto it while she dealt with the paperwork nobody ever warns you about. Death certificates, bank accounts, a phone plan that technically still needed to be canceled by someone who was no longer able to cancel it herself. That's how it ended up on my kitchen counter. Screen cracked in one corner, right where you'd expect a phone to crack if it fell out of a chest rig. Powered all the way down, battery long since dead. I plugged it in mostly out of some instinct I couldn't fully explain to myself. You don't leave a dead man's phone dead. It felt disrespectful. Somehow, the way it feels wrong to leave someone's car keys just lying somewhere random after they're gone. I couldn't have told you the logic. There wasn't really any logic. It just felt like the smallest, easiest thing I could still do for him. For 2 days, nothing happened. I actually forgot it was even plugged in half the time, walking past it on my way to the coffee maker every morning. This small cracked rectangle quietly charging in the corner of my counter. 3 days after that, it buzzed once. A short, single vibration against the granite. I ignored it. Figured it was some backlog of old notifications finally catching up now that the thing had power and signal again after however many weeks of being dark. Emails, app updates, the digital equivalent of mail piling up in a box. The next morning it buzzed a second time, longer this time, and this time the screen actually lit up. I happened to be standing right there, mug in hand, and I caught the notification banner for maybe 2 full seconds before the screen dimmed back down and went dark again. *1. New photo added to shared album. Yuri. I stood there in my kitchen, holding a coffee that was getting cold, doing the math over and over in my head, like repeating it enough times would eventually change the answer. Yuri had died 6 days earlier. I'd stood at the small service they held for him 5 days earlier, and somehow, according to the phone sitting 3 feet away from me, a photo had just been added to an album under his name. I called his sister immediately, phone still in my other hand, coffee completely forgotten now. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she hadn't been sleeping much either. She hadn't added anything to the shared album. Neither had I, honestly. I didn't even remember I was still on it. It was one of those albums people set up early in a deployment. Half a dozen friends and family members added so photos could get passed around without anyone needing signal to send them individually. I hadn't opened it in probably 8 months. We were both staring at the exact same notification from 2 different rooms, in 2 different cities, both asking out loud the same question without meaning to say it at the same time. Asterisk who added a photo. Asterisk she got into the album before I did. She was already on her phone when I called. I heard her go quiet on the line for a long moment, long enough that I actually said her name to check she was still there. And then she said 4 words I still think about more than I'd like to admit. Even now. It's dated yesterday. Once we hung up, I opened it myself, sitting down at my kitchen table because standing suddenly felt like too much effort. One new image. A photo of a tree line at dusk. Nothing dramatic on the surface. Nothing that screamed for attention. No faces in frame. No caption. No message attached. Nothing typed underneath it. Just trees. Fading amber light through the branches. And in the very corner of the frame, barely visible if you weren't looking for it, the edge of what looked unmistakably like a folded field stretcher. I checked the metadata out of some half-formed instinct, pressed and held on the image, scrolled to details, the way you'd check a receipt. The listed capture date was 2 days asterisk after asterisk his death. I want to be honest about where my head went first, because I think the honest part is what makes the rest of this worth telling. It went somewhere dark. I'd worked enough strange, unexplainable call-outs during that war to have mostly stopped ruling things out completely. When you've spent 2 years around sudden, senseless death, your sense of what's impossible gets a lot more flexible than it used to be, whether you want it to or not. But I also knew, with total certainty, that Yuri would have absolutely hated that reaction out of me. He was the most technically minded person I'd ever worked with, the guy who used to lecture the rest of us about battery percentages and signal bars like it was scripture, half joking, but only half. He genuinely believed that most unexplainable things were just situations where nobody had bothered to check the boring explanation first. So, instead of spiraling, I tried, deliberately, to do what he would have done in my position. I made myself look at the actual data instead of just reacting to the headline. I sent the file, the raw file, pulled directly off the phone, not a screenshot, not a forwarded copy, to a friend named Sasha who did digital forensics work for an NGO that documented and authenticated footage coming out of the front lines. It's a real specialty now, verifying whether war zone photo and video content has been staged, altered, or misstated, and she was good at it, methodical in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of Yuri himself. 2 days later she called me back. I remember exactly where I was standing when the phone rang, because I'd been half dreading and half hoping for that call the entire time. The first thing out of her mouth, before even a hello, was, "This isn't what you think it is, but it's not nothing, either." Before she explained anything else, she asked me one question that stuck with me. Had I noticed anything strange about the phone itself in the days before the photo appeared? I told her about the 2 buzzes, about how the screen had lit up only briefly each time, like it was struggling to hold a charge even while plugged in. She said that fit. A device coming back online after a long stretch completely dark often behaves erratically for a day or 2 while it reconnects to every account, every server, every backlog it missed. It wasn't sinister. It was just a phone catching up on weeks of absence all at once. She walked me through it slowly, patiently, because she could tell from my voice on the phone that I wasn't going to accept a fast answer. And honestly, I don't think she wanted to give me one either. There are actually 2 different dates hiding inside almost every photo you've ever taken, she told me. Most people go their whole lives without ever needing to know this, which is exactly why it can feel so unsettling the one time it matters. One is called date taken. That gets written once, automatically, by the camera itself, the exact second the shutter fires, and under normal circumstances, it almost never changes afterward, no matter what happens to the file later. The other is date created, sometimes labeled date modified, and that one refers to something completely different, when an asterisk copy asterisk of that file landed somewhere, on some device or in some folder. Those 2 numbers can be wildly different from each other, sometimes by hours, sometimes by weeks, and almost nobody ever thinks to check. copying a photo to a new device resets it. Restoring it from a backup resets it. Saving it out of a messaging app resets it. A lot of apps actually re-encode the image entirely when you save it, which can strip out portions of the original data in the process. Downloading it from a cloud account resets it too? Any one of those can reset the visible created date to the moment of that transfer, while the real, original capture date stays buried, unchanged, still sitting inside the file's hidden metadata the entire time. She said she'd seen this exact scenario before, more than once, always in a similar context, always involving someone in an area with unreliable infrastructure. Someone takes a photo on a phone with no signal, which was common enough in that stretch of the war, where entire regions had spotty coverage at best and none at all in the worst spots. The photo they took sits queued on the device afterward, unsent, unsensed, just sitting there, waiting for a connection that might not come for days. Then, eventually, the phone finds a signal. Maybe it's picked up and physically moved somewhere else. Maybe it's brought back to a base with working towers. And the instant it reconnects, the upload queue empties out all at once. The photo goes up, and to anyone watching that shared album from the outside, with no idea any of this happened behind the scenes, it looks exactly like the photo appeared out of nowhere, freshly dated, days after the person who took it was already gone. The picture wasn't taken after he died, she told me, very calmly, the way you'd explain something to someone you knew was barely holding it together. It was taken before. It just didn't arrive until after. That should have been the end of it. And honestly, for about a day, it genuinely was. I told his sister everything Sasha had explained to me, walking her through the 2 dates, the offline queue, all of it. She cried on the phone, but it sounded closer to relief than grief, which was the first time in weeks I'd heard her sound anything close to okay. I put the phone away in a kitchen drawer, the same one where I kept old chargers and takeout menus, and told myself the story was finally closed. Then, 2 nights later, unable to sleep, I looked at the photo one more time, really looked at it, the way you look at something when you've got nothing else to do at 1 in the morning, the tree line, the edge of the folded stretcher, just visible in the corner of the frame, and this time I recognized the location, not from the trees themselves, which honestly all looked more or less identical to me, but from a broken fence post just past the edge of the frame, leaning at a specific angle I'd seen before. It was the extraction point, the exact clearing where Yuri had lost contact with his unit for 11 minutes before they finally found him again. Months earlier, on a completely different, unrelated mission. 11 minutes nobody had ever fully explained to me, or to anyone else in the unit, as far as I knew. 11 minutes he never talked about afterward, not really, except once, late at night, off duty, both of us half asleep on a supply crate waiting for a transport that was running hours behind. He'd said something then that I hadn't thought about again until that exact moment, sitting alone at my kitchen table at 1 in the morning. I don't really remember what happened out there. I just remember thinking someone should know exactly where this spot is. That's when it actually clicked, sitting there at the table, and it clicked hard enough that I had to put the phone down for a second. He photographed the extraction point, not because of anything supernatural, not as some final message reaching back across 6 days, because it was instinct, the exact same instinct that made him carry that phone everywhere in the first place, through every deployment, every rotation, every stretch of dead zone. Document the location. Make sure someone, somewhere, ends up with a record. Even if he wasn't the one who got to explain why it mattered. It's the same instinct that had him spend 2 years teaching younger medics, myself included, more than once, that the smallest, most boring piece of documentation is sometimes the only thing standing between a bad outcome and a saved one. Log the coordinates, note the landmarks, take the photo, even when it feels pointless, even when nobody asks you to. The photo wasn't a message from beyond anything. It was a habit, plain and simple, from a man who spent his entire service thinking about the next person before he ever thought about himself. It had just taken 6 days, 1 offline upload queue, and a dead battery finally finding a wall outlet to finally catch up to the rest of us. Here's the part that actually matters, though, and it's the part I almost didn't include, because on paper it sounds almost too neat, too clean, like something added afterward to make the story feel finished. But it's true, that extraction point, the exact clearing shown in the photo, got flagged afterward by his unit as a recurring safe corridor for future evacuations. It's still used today, as far as I know, precisely because there is now a photographed, Time-stamped. Geotag record of that exact location existing. Filed under his name. Uploaded days after his own funeral. By a delay that nobody predicted and nobody engineered on purpose. He didn't come back. That part doesn't get to have a tidy ending, and I'm not going to pretend it does. But something he did, without ever meaning it as any kind of final act, without any way of knowing it would arrive the way it did, ended up outliving the 11 minutes nobody could ever fully explain. I still don't have his phone. His sister kept it, which felt right, and I never asked for it back. But I kept a copy of that photo, not because it's dramatic, or strange, or even sad. Once you actually understand what happened underneath it, I kept it because it's the closest thing I still have to a final conversation with him. A photo that showed up late, from a person who was always thinking about the next person, right up until the very last timestamp he had left to give. If you've ever had a piece of technology do something that felt impossible for 5 minutes, before it turned out to have a completely ordinary explanation underneath it, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one.